Good evening and welcome to the Folklore Hearth. Tonight, I'll be sharing a few old tales from Korea, including the clever rabbit and the dragon king, and the curious story of the tiger and the dried persimmon. If you find these quiet tellings comforting, you're welcome to like the video or subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy them. And if you'd like, leave a comment to tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I love seeing who's listening from where. For now, perhaps dim the lights, let a fan hum softly nearby, and settle beneath the covers. When you're comfortable, let's begin with a tale of courage, wit, and a rabbit who must face the dragon king beneath the sea. There was once, beneath the broad blue waters surrounding the Korean coast, a palace where the dragon king held court. Its walls were made of pale coral and polished shell, and its roofs curved like waves resting beneath the moon. Long ribbons of seaweed drifted from the towers. Fish moved through the open halls as quietly as birds through a garden, their silver sides catching the greenish light. In the outer courtyards, small crabs carried messages from one gate to another, while bright shrimp arranged pearls in shallow dishes for the evening lamps. The Dragon King had ruled there for many years. He was not always stern, as kings in stories sometimes are. He listened to petitions from fishermen, watched over the currents, and sent rain toward the fields when the clouds were willing. Yet one season, when the sea was calm and the moon shone round and white above the palace, the Dragon King became ill. At first, he felt only a little weariness. He rested longer on his couch of mother of pearl and asked for warm seaweed broth. Then his scales lost their brightness, and the music of the shell flutes seemed too distant for him to hear. The palace physicians brought herbs from deep trenches, sweet water from hidden springs, and tiny fruits that grew where sunlight entered the sea. Nothing restored his strength. The court grew quiet. Even the bells of the tide, which usually rang softly whenever the current changed, seemed to wait. Ministers gathered in the hall of 10,000 waves. They spoke in low voices, while their robes drifted around them like underwater mist. At last, one physician bowed and said that an unusual remedy was needed. Only the liver of a living rabbit, he declared, could cure the Dragon King. The words moved through the hall like a cold current. Everyone knew that rabbits lived on the dry land, among grasses, stones, and trees. No rabbit had ever been seen in the underwater palace. The ministers looked at one another, wondering who could travel so far and who could persuade such a creature to leave its familiar hills. Then the turtle stepped forward. He was old enough to know the channels between the islands, the shelves of rock where mussels rested, and the quiet places where the sea became shallow and warm. His shell was dark green and brown, patterned like wet stones, nose beneath clear water. He bowed before the Dragon King. "I will go," said the turtle. "I will seek a rabbit and bring it here." The Dragon King lifted his head. His eyes were tired, but kind. "Go carefully," he said, "and return safely." So the turtle left the palace. He passed through gates of pearl, beneath arches of coral, and up through layers of water that grew brighter and brighter. The sea around him opened in blue folds. He followed the familiar tides toward the shore, where waves breathed against the sand and salt air mingled with the smell of warm earth. At last, he reached the dry land. The turtle rested beneath a broad reed and watched the countryside. It was a peaceful afternoon. Rice fields lay in shining squares beyond the village, their green blades stirring whenever a breeze crossed them. On a low hillside, wild grasses bent beneath the weight of seed heads. Bees hummed among small flowers. Somewhere far away, a wooden gate opened and closed, and from a farmhouse came the faint clatter of bowls being washed. The turtle waited. He knew that a rabbit could not be hurried. He knew, too, that the sea palace would seem strange to a creature accustomed to sunlight and soil. He would need gentle words and perhaps a little imagination. Near sunset, a rabbit appeared at the edge of the grass. He was soft brown, with bright dark eyes and ears that turned toward every sound. He moved lightly among the plants, pausing to nibble a tender stem, then lifting his head to watch the sky. He was not the largest rabbit in the hills, nor the strongest, but he was observant. He noticed the shadows of hawks, the paths of fox, and the difference between a harmless rustle and a dangerous one. The turtle greeted him politely. "Good evening," he said. "What a lovely place this is, and what a fortunate rabbit you must be to live among such grasses." The rabbit looked at him with interest. "Good evening. You have come a long way from the water." "I have," said the turtle. "I serve the Dragon King beneath the sea." The rabbit's ears lifted. He had heard stories of the undersea kingdom. Some said its gates were made of crystal. Some said its gardens held flowers that opened only in darkness. Others spoke of halls where the light came from pearls, and of banquets laid out on golden trays. The turtle saw the rabbit listening and continued in a warm, unhurried voice. "Under the waves there are gardens of coral in every color. There are halls where fish glide like lanterns and bridges woven from silverweed. The Dragon King's palace is finer than any palace on land. Even the quietest room is full of music, for the currents play through shells set along the walls." The rabbit gazed toward the sea. Evening light rested across it, turning the water violet and copper. "Is it truly so beautiful?" he asked. "More beautiful than words can say," replied the turtle. "There are pearls scattered along the walks, moonlit paths that wind beneath the water, and rooms where one may rest while gentle waves pass overhead. You would be welcomed as an honored guest. You could see wonders no creature on land has ever seen. The rabbit considered the invitation. He was curious, as rabbits often are, and he liked the thought of seeing something beyond the hillside. He also noticed that the turtle spoke with care, never making a sudden movement, never pressing him too closely. "Would I be able to return?" the rabbit asked. "Of course," said the turtle. "I would bring you safely back." The rabbit looked once more at the sea. The first stars were appearing. A thin line of foam shone along the shore, and the air carried salt off the water and the cooler smell of soil at dusk. "Then I will go," he said. The turtle lowered his broad shell, and the rabbit climbed carefully upon it. Together they entered the water. At first the rabbit held tightly, for the shore slipped away beneath him, and the waves rose around his paws. But the turtle moved steadily. The sea was not rough. It lifted them, lowered them, and carried them onward as calmly as a slow breath. The rabbit watched the world change. Above, the sky became a wavering silver ceiling. Below, strands of seaweed streamed like long green ribbons. Small fish accompanied them for a while, flashing blue and gold before turning away. A pale jellyfish drifted by, glowing softly in the dimness. Once, they passed beneath a broad shadow, but it was only a whale traveling far below, peaceful and immense. The farther they went, the more the rabbit forgot his first nervousness. He listened to the soft movement of water and felt the turtle's shell rise and fall beneath him. There was something soothing about the journey. The sea seemed to have no roads, yet the turtle knew exactly where he was going. At last, lights appeared ahead. They were not the lights of boats or villages. They glowed from towers beneath the waves, from pearl lamps and crystal windows, from gardens where tiny creatures shone like living stars. The palace of the Dragon King unfolded before them, vast and quiet, its coral pillars glowing rose, amber, and pale green. The turtle carried the rabbit through the main gate. The palace servants had prepared a welcome. Shell bells sounded softly. Fish musicians played pipes made from hollow reeds. Courtiers bowed, their long sleeves drifting in the water. The rabbit was given a place of honor, on a cushion woven from fine watergrass, and dishes were set before him. Sweet sea plants, tender roots, fruits from islands far away, and little cakes made from rice flour and honey. For a time, the rabbit was delighted. He looked into rooms whose ceilings were covered with shining scales. He walked beside ponds where tiny seahorses moved among flowers. He saw a library of rolled leaves sealed in glass shells, and a gallery where polished stones showed the changing colors of the sea. The turtle pointed out the music court, the pearl orchard, and a quiet balcony from which one could watch moonlight tremble on the water far above. The rabbit thanked him He asked many questions. He admired everything, and the palace servants smiled to see his wonder. Yet after a while, he noticed something. The courtiers did not look joyful. They moved quietly and spoke in whispers. The musicians played only a few notes before stopping. At the far end of the palace, behind curtains of blue silk, the Dragon King rested upon his couch. The rabbit was brought before him. The Dragon King appeared very tired. His great body lay curled among cushions, and his scales had a muted sheen. Still, he greeted the rabbit courteously. "Welcome," he said. "I hope the journey was comfortable." "It was," said the rabbit. "Your palace is magnificent." The Dragon King gave a faint smile. Then the physician stepped forward and explained the remedy that was required. The rabbit listened. He understood at once why the turtle had spoken so sweetly on the shore, why the courtiers had prepared such an elaborate welcome, and why everyone watched him with quiet expectation. He did not leap away. He did not raise his voice. He simply sat very still. While the palace lights trembled in the water around him, then he bowed. "Your Majesty," he said, "I am honored that my liver is thought so valuable. But I must tell you something important. A rabbit's liver is not carried inside the body all the time." The physicians leaned closer. "We rabbits," continued the rabbit, "take out our livers when we are at home. We set them on a sunny hillside to air, so that they stay fresh and healthy. I left mine there this very morning." The court became silent. The turtle looked at the rabbit. The rabbit looked back with a calm expression. "If your Majesty will allow me to return to the shore," he said, "I will fetch it at once. I would never wish to disappoint a king who has welcomed me so graciously." The ministers whispered among themselves. The physician stroked his chin. The Dragon King, being ill and anxious for a cure, accepted the explanation. "Take him back," he told the turtle. "Bring him swiftly." So the turtle carried the rabbit once more through the palace gates and out into the open sea. The journey began as before, the pearl towers fading behind them, and the pale water folding gently overhead. For a while, neither spoke. The turtle felt uneasy. He had been pleased to find such a clever rabbit, yet he had never imagined that a liver might be left on a hill. He remembered the Dragon King's tired face and wished to keep his promise. The rabbit, meanwhile, sat quietly upon the shell, watching the shifting water and listening to the turtle's steady strokes. At last, the turtle asked, "Are you certain your liver is safe upon the hillside?" The rabbit answered, "Of course. It is airing in the sun, just as I told you." The turtle thought about this. Do all rabbits keep their livers outside? "Those who value them do," said the rabbit. They went on. Above them, the water grew lighter. The fish became fewer. the seaweed gave way to sand. The rabbit could smell the shore before he saw it. Damp earth, grass, and the faint smoke of evening cooking fires. When they reached the shallows, the turtle lowered himself until his shell touched the sand. The rabbit stepped down. He stretched his legs, which had grown stiff from the long journey, and looked toward the familiar hillside. The turtle lifted his head. "Come," he said. "We must find your liver." The rabbit smiled politely. "Yes, we must." Then, with one light spring, he bounded from the water's edge into the grass. He ran past the reeds, over the low stones and up the slope where the evening wind moved through the seed heads. His brown coat disappeared among the shadows and the golden stems. He paused only once, at the top of the rise, to look back. The turtle remained below, half in the shallow water, half upon the shore. He understood then there had never been a liver drying in the sun. The rabbit had simply used his wits to return home. The turtle was disappointed, but he could not help admiring the rabbit's quick thinking. He had promised to bring back a rabbit, and he had done so, though not in the way the court desired. And he knew that a creature so easily lured by pleasant words might one day learn to choose his own words more carefully. The rabbit called down from the hillside, "Friend turtle, you should not believe every story told beside the shore." The turtle sighed, though gently. "And you should not believe every story told beneath the sea." The rabbit dipped his ears in farewell. "That is true." The turtle turned toward the water. He traveled back alone, through the darkening sea, past the fields of swaying weed and the quiet distances. When he reached the palace, the Dragon King and his ministers were waiting. The turtle bowed and told the truth. He explained how the rabbit had spoken of a liver left upon a hill, how they had returned to the shore, and how the rabbit had vanished into the grass. For a moment, the court was still. Then the Dragon King closed his eyes and gave a weary laugh. It was not a loud laugh, but it moved through the palace like a warm current. "The rabbit has escaped," he said. "And perhaps we have all been reminded that wisdom does not belong to kings alone." The physicians prepared another remedy, this time from herbs, sea moss, and water gathered where the tide met a spring. Slowly, the Dragon King recovered. His scales brightened. He returned to the Hall of 10,000 Waves, and the bells of the tide began to ring again. As for the turtle, he remained a trusted servant of the palace. He traveled often between sea and shore, and whenever he met a rabbit upon the sand, he greeted it with particular respect. And the rabbit, he lived safely among the grasses, where sunlight warmed the stones and evening insects hummed. He remembered the shining palace beneath the waves, the pearl lamps, the coral gardens, the gentle rhythm of the turtle's journey. He was grateful to have seen such wonders, but more grateful still to feel earth beneath his feet. When night settled over the hillside, the rabbit tucked himself beneath a bank of fragrant grass. The sea breathed beyond the shore. Far below, in the Dragon King's palace, pearl lamps glowed through the water. Between land and sea lay a quiet understanding. Cleverness could protect the small. Kindness could guide the lost. And even a king might learn from a rabbit. The wind passed softly over the hill. The grasses leaned together. The stars appeared, one after another, and the world became still. Close your eyes a little tighter and let the next story wash over you. There was once, in a quiet Korean village beneath dark wooded hills, a winter night so still that every small sound seemed to travel a great distance. Snow had fallen during the afternoon, not in a storm but in patient, soft layers, settling on the tiled roofs, the earthen walls, and the bare branches of the persimmon trees. Now the moon rested somewhere beyond the clouds. The village lay mostly dark, its houses gathered close together for warmth, with only a few windows glowing amber behind oiled paper. From the chimneys, thin blue threads of smoke drifted upward and disappeared into the cold. At the edge of the village, where the last fields gave way to pine and oak, a tiger was walking alone. He was a great tiger, broad across the shoulders, striped like shadows beneath winter branches. His paws pressed quietly into the snow, leaving rounded marks along the narrow path. The cold had sharpened his hunger. For many days he had found little to eat. The deer had moved higher into the hills. The rabbits were hidden beneath roots, and the pheasants had grown cautious beneath the reeds. So the tiger descended toward the village. He did not come roaring. He did not wish to wake the dogs or bring lanterns shining through the night. He moved with the careful softness of falling snow, his whiskers silvered by frost, his breath appearing and fading before his face. As he passed the final stand of trees, he saw a small house near the road. Light glowed behind its paper window. From within came the uneven crying of a baby. The tiger paused. The sound rose and fell, carried through the quiet air. A thin, persistent wail, full of the helpless sorrow of a little child who could not yet explain what was wrong. Perhaps the baby was hungry. Perhaps the baby was tired. Perhaps the winter wind had found a crack beneath the door. The tiger drew nearer. He crouched beside the outer wall, where a low roof sheltered him from the snow, his striped flank resting in shadow. Through the window, he could hear a mother moving about the warm room. "Hush now," she murmured. "Hush, little one. The night is cold, and your mother is here." But the baby continued to cry. The tiger listened, keeping very still. He had expected the household to be asleep. Instead, the mother walked slowly across the floor, her feet making soft sounds on the smooth wooden boards. Somewhere near the hearth, a coal shifted. A kettle gave a faint, sleepy sigh. The smell of warm rice, smoke, and dried grain came through the seams of the house, mingling with the clean scent of snow. The baby cried louder. The mother tried again. Hush, hush. If you do not stop crying, a tiger will come. At the word tiger, the great animal outside lifted his head. He knew very well what a tiger was. He knew the strength in his own paws, the weight of his body, and the silence with which he could cross a forest. He knew that people feared him. He had seen hunters turn back at the sight of his tracks, and heard village dogs bark from a safe distance, and then hide beneath their porches. Surely, he thought, the baby would stop now. But the baby did not stop. The crying grew stronger, round and bright, filling the little house and pressing through the paper window. It seemed almost as though the child had heard the warning and found it unimportant. The tiger blinked. Perhaps, he thought, the child did not understand. Or perhaps the mother had spoken of a very ordinary tiger, while he himself was a particularly impressive one. He settled beneath the eaves and waited, listening to the mother soothe the baby with a low, patient voice. There, there, she said. Do not cry. The tiger is outside. Still the crying continued. The tiger lowered his ears a little. Snow slipped from a pine branch nearby and landed with a soft hush. Far away, an owl called once, then became silent again. Inside the house, the mother seemed to think. The baby's cries came in waves, with small pauses between that never lasted. The mother lifted the child, rocked gently, and murmured words the tiger could not make out. He imagined the little room, the warm ondol floor beneath the woven mats, the low table pushed aside, the mother's sleeves gathered around the baby, and the soft glow of a lamp burning near the wall. Then he heard her say, "Perhaps you would like a dried persimmon." At once, the baby became quiet. The tiger froze. The silence inside the house was so sudden that it seemed to widen the whole night. A moment before, the baby's wailing had filled every corner. Now there was only the faint crackle of the fire and the mother's relieved breathing. The tiger stared at the paper window. A dried persimmon? He had heard the words clearly. The mother had warned the child about a tiger, and the baby had cried louder. Then she had mentioned a dried persimmon, and immediately the baby had fallen silent. The tiger looked toward the dark hills behind him. He had spent his life believing that the tiger was among the most fearsome creatures in the world. Yet here, in a village house, a baby was not troubled at all by the thought of a tiger. The child had gone still only at the words dried persimmon. What could such a thing be? The tiger imagined a creature with a hide hard as old bark and teeth sharp as winter ice. Perhaps a dried persimmon had many legs, or no legs at all, and moved through the darkness without a sound. Perhaps it was small enough to slip under a door, yet powerful enough to silence a crying child with a single glance. He remembered the mother's calm voice. She had spoken of the tiger almost as an ordinary household matter. But when she mentioned the dried persimmon, she had found exactly what was needed. The tiger's tail curled close to his paws. Inside, the baby made a small, contented sound. The mother murmured softly, perhaps opening a basket or lifting a cloth. The tiger heard the faint rustle of something being unwrapped. Then came a sticky, sweet scent, carried out through the cracks in the wall. It was the fragrance of dried fruit, deep and honeyed, touched with the memory of autumn sunlight. In the village, persimmons had been gathered when the leaves turned gold, and the fruit grew heavy on the branches. Some had been peeled and hung beneath the eaves, where wind and time drew away their moisture, until their skins turned wrinkled and dark, and their insides grew soft and rich. The tiger smelled it and shivered. Yes, he thought, that must be the dried persimmon. The mother gave the treat to the baby, and the child made a pleased little sound. No fear in it, no struggle, no crying, only quiet satisfaction. Outside, the tiger's courage grew smaller. He tried to reason with himself. Perhaps the baby had simply wanted something sweet. Perhaps the mother had chosen those words without meaning anything by them. But the tiger did not know this. He knew only what he had heard. The word tiger had failed, and the word dried persimmon had succeeded. He imagined that terrible creature hidden somewhere nearby, waiting in the cold. Maybe it had followed him from the forest. Maybe it was already behind the house, watching him through the darkness. Maybe the dried persimmon was not a creature at all, but a strange and mighty spirit of the winter fields. The tiger glanced over his shoulder. The village remained quiet. A roofline rested under snow. A rope hung beside a gate, stiff with frost. No monster appeared. Yet the absence of any visible thing made the thought more unsettling. A creature so formidable, he decided, might not need to show itself. Trembling now, he rose and drew back into the deeper shadow beside the house, where a low ox shed leaned against the wall. He pressed himself close to its rough boards to gather his courage before slipping away, and there, in the dark warmth of the shed, he grew very still. But the tiger was not the only visitor abroad that night. While the great animal crouched shivering by the shed, a thief had also come quietly to the sleeping village, meaning to steal the family's ox and led it away before dawn. He crept along the wall, feeling his way in the dark, and reached the shed where the ox was kept. His fingers found a broad, warm, furred back, and in the blackness, he took it for the ox itself. Wasting no time, the thief threw a leg over that wide back and settled himself upon it, ready to hurry the animal out of the village. The tiger felt the sudden weight land upon his shoulders. His heart leapt in terror. The dried persimmon. It had found him at last. It had crept up in the darkness and sprung onto his very back, exactly as he had feared. With a great muffled bound, he burst from beside the shed and fled, no longer caring about lanterns or dogs, thinking only of escaping the dreadful creature clinging to him. Up the snowy path he ran, past the persimmon trees, past the sleeping fields, and in among the black branches of the forest. He ran as he had never run before, certain that the fearsome dried persimmon was riding upon him and would seize him if he slowed for even a moment. The thief, for his part, was quite as frightened as the tiger, for as they rushed beneath the pale breaking moonlight, he felt the coarse striped fur beneath him and understood all at once that this was no gentle ox. It was a tiger, and a very great one. He clung on tightly, hardly daring to breathe, wondering how ever he might get down without coming to harm. Then, as the racing tiger passed beneath a large old tree whose branches hung low over the path, the thief saw his chance. He reached up, caught hold of a stout limb, and pulled himself off the tiger's back and up into the safety of the tree, where he sat among the snowy boughs, hardly believing his good fortune. The tiger, feeling the terrible weight lift suddenly from his shoulders, was certain he had at last shaken the dried persimmon loose. On he ran, lighter now and giddy with relief, deeper and higher into the hills, until the village lights disappeared behind him. He climbed to where the air smelled of pine resin and cold stone, and the moon touched his fur with pale light. At last he reached a sheltered hollow among the hills. There he stopped beneath a leaning rock, breathing slowly. Around him the forest settled into its winter stillness. Snow rested on the boughs. A small stream moved beneath its thin covering of ice. Somewhere above, a nightbird called with a quiet, questioning note. The tiger listened. No dried persimmon followed. He remained there until his breathing steadied. Hunger still lived in his belly, and the night was still cold. But he was safe among the familiar trees. After a while, he curled his great striped body beneath the rock and laid his head upon his paws. High in his tree above the path, the thief also waited until the night grew calm. then climbed carefully down and made his way home through the snow, deciding he had had quite enough of stealing oxen for one winter. Far below, in the village house, the mother tucked the baby beneath a quilt. The fire settled into red coals. The lamp burned low. The dried persimmon, small and sweet, had done its work without ever knowing that a tiger had been waiting outside. The village returned to sleep. Snow continued to fall, feather light, over roofs and fields, over the narrow road and the tiger's deep tracks. By morning, the prints would be softened and partly covered until no one could tell how far the great animal had travelled in the night. And in the hills, the tiger slept for a little while, dreaming perhaps of mysterious creatures and impossible dangers. Yet the forest was kind to him. The wind moved gently through the pines. The stream whispered beneath the ice. Dawn waited patiently beyond the eastern ridge. In time, the tiger would return to his usual paths, and the villagers would continue drying persimmons beneath their eaves each autumn. Children would eat the sweet fruit from warm hands, and mothers would tell many soothing things to children who cried in the night. But on that particular winter evening, a tiny baby and a small piece of dried fruit had persuaded the greatest creature in the forest to flee all the way into the hills. So the story was remembered. Sometimes fear is not measured by size, claws, or strength. Sometimes it is only a word heard at the right moment, carried through a paper window into the snowy dark. And sometimes when the fire is low and the night is very still, even a tiger may discover that there are mysteries greater than himself. The snow falls softly. The village rests. The hills keep their quiet watch. And somewhere beneath a sheltering rock, the tiger breathes in the cold pine-scented air, closing his eyes as the long winter night folds gently around him. Take a slow, deep breath and let's drift into our next story. There was once, in a green valley of Korea, a small frog who lived beside a quiet stream with his mother. The valley rested between low, rounded hills, where morning mist gathered in the hollows and drifted slowly upward when the sun touched the roofs of the village. Rice fields shone in neat, watery squares. Bamboo leaned together along the paths, whispering whenever the breeze moved through its narrow leaves. In the evenings, smoke from cooking fires rose blue and thin above the thatched houses, and the stream carried the soft, unhurried sound of water over stones. The little frog was green as young grass after rain. His eyes were bright, his feet were quick, and his heart, though not unkind, was filled with a stubborn wish to do everything differently from what his mother asked. If she said, "Little one, please come down from the stone," he climbed higher. If she said, "Stay on the bank and keep dry. He slipped into the water with a pleased little splash. If she asked him to sit beneath the warm roof while the rain passed, he hopped out beneath the dripping eaves. If she asked him to gather close beside her in the shade, he wandered into the sun, where the pebbles were hot beneath his feet. His mother was patient. She spoke gently, even when her work was interrupted, even when she had to search among reeds and grasses for her damp, wandering child. She would wait beside the stream until he returned. She would smooth a leaf beneath him when he was tired. She would share with him the smallest, sweetest insects and show him where the evening air was warm. Yet the little frog continued to do the opposite of every request. One clear morning, when the valley was bright with sunlight, his mother said, "Please stay near the house today. The hills are slippery after last night's rain." The little frog nodded solemnly. Then, as soon as she turned away, he hopped down the path toward the hills. He crossed a patch of silver mud, passed under the bamboo, and climbed a smooth rock where the sun had dried the moss. From there, he could see the stream winding below, the rice paddies bright as scattered panes of glass, and the distant roofs gathered together beneath curling smoke. He felt very pleased with himself. His mother found him after a while and called from below, "Come down, my child. Come down carefully." The frog looked at her, then climbed to the next rock. "Please come down," she said again. He climbed higher still until the rock ended in a little ledge above the valley. There he sat in the warm wind, looking proud and very small. His mother waited. She did not scold loudly. She only stood in the grass, her hands folded before her, while the afternoon light lengthened over the hillside. At last the frog came down, because the stone had grown cool and his feet were tired. Another day, his mother asked him to remain dry while she gathered food. The clouds were dark along the mountain ridge, and the air smelled of wet earth. "Stay beneath the broad leaf," she said. "The rain will come soon." The frog looked at the leaf. He looked at the clouds. Then he sprang directly into the stream. The first drops began to fall. They made round rings upon the water, and the little frog swam among them, delighted. His mother crouched beneath the leaf and watched him. Rain gathered on the grasses. The stream grew darker and quicker. When the shower had passed, the frog returned shivering, though he pretended not to be cold. His mother gathered him close and warmed him. and said nothing for a while. The valley smelled fresh and deep. Water shone on every reed. Somewhere beyond the fields, a wooden gate creaked softly in the breeze. As the days passed, the little frog's habit became well known. The birds heard it. The insects heard it. The fish beneath the stream stones heard it. If his mother asked him to go east, he went west. If she asked him to be quiet, he called out. If she asked him to wait, he hurried away. The mother frog grew older. Her movements became slower, though they remained careful. She no longer crossed the stream in a single leap. She rested more often beneath the wild ginger leaves, where their broad green surfaces gathered beads of water. In the evening, she liked to sit beside her son and listen to the valley settle into darkness. The little frog, meanwhile, had grown large enough to care for himself, but he had not grown wiser. His skin was bright and smooth, and his legs were strong. He could leap from stone to stone with ease. Yet whenever his mother spoke, he listened only long enough to discover what the opposite might be. Sometimes she looked at him with tired affection. There was love in her gaze, and also a quiet sadness, like the last pale light remaining on a winter hillside. One evening, after a long season of rain, she said, "My child, come sit beside me." The frog came, because he knew she would soon ask him to do something else. They sat near the stream. The current moved slowly under the twilight, carrying tiny leaves downstream. The mountains were blue in the distance. A farmer's lantern glimmered far across the rice fields, and from a nearby house came the muted sound of someone closing a wooden door. His mother rested beneath a willow and watched the first stars appear. "Little one," she said, "you have always been different from other frogs." The frog lowered his head. She continued, "When I ask you to go down, you go up. When I ask you to stay dry, you enter the water. When I ask you to come near, you wander far away." The frog shifted his feet in the damp soil. He knew these things were true. For the first time, they did not seem amusing. His mother's voice remained gentle. "I have tried to guide you, and perhaps I have spoken too often. Still, I have loved you through every season. I loved you when you were no larger than a curled leaf. I loved you when you disappeared beneath the rain. I loved you when I searched for you among stones and reeds." The stream murmured beside them. "I am growing very tired now," she said. "Soon I will need to rest." The frog looked at her. Her back was curved. Her eyes, once bright with constant watchfulness, had become soft and deep. A little moth passed through the evening air, and she followed it with a peaceful glance before returning her gaze to her son. "When that time comes," she said, "please take me to the stream bank. Lay me beside the water, where I may hear it flowing." The frog's heart tightened. He understood her at once. All his life, she had asked for one thing, and he had done another. Now she was asking him to place her beside the stream because she believed he would carry her instead to the high, dry mountain. She trusted his old stubbornness more than she trusted any promise he might make. The frog opened his mouth, but no words came. He wanted to tell her that he had changed. He wanted to say that he would obey her exactly, yet the words seemed too small, and his mother was already looking toward the darkening hills. That night, the valley rested beneath a clear sky. The moon rose over the ridge and laid a pale road across the rice paddies. The mother frog slept beneath the willow. Her son remained awake beside her, listening to the stream and to the soft rustling of leaves overhead. In the days that followed, he tried to behave differently. When she asked him to come near, he came. When she asked him to remain dry, he stayed beneath the leaves. When she pointed toward the low path, he did not climb the rocks. But old habits are like paths worn through grass. Even when one wishes to turn away, one's feet may wander back. Once, his mother asked him to bring a flower from the bank. He brought one from the hill. Another time, she asked him to wait beneath a roof, and he found himself at the edge of the water before he remembered. Each mistake made him more sorrowful. His mother never complained. She only smiled faintly and rested. The summer air grew heavy. Cicadas hummed in the trees, their long, steady song filling the warm afternoons. The stream became shallow in places, revealing smooth stones polished by years of water. At dusk, fireflies appeared among the reeds, small lights floating near the ground. Then, one quiet morning, the mother frog could no longer rise. Her son stayed beside her. The valley was very still. A pale mist lay over the fields, and the distant mountains seemed to float above it. She breathed slowly, as if listening to some faraway music. "My child," she whispered, "the time has come." The frog pressed close against her. "Remember," she said, "take me to the stream bank. Lay me there, where the water can sing." He nodded again and again. This time he understood every word. She closed her eyes and grew still, as one does at the end of a long day. The wind moved through the willow leaves. Somewhere in the village, a rooster called once, then fell silent. The little frog remained beside his mother until the valley had brightened and the mist had lifted from the rice fields. When she had gone to her rest, he carried her gently through the grass. The path toward the stream was familiar. He had travelled it in sunshine and rain, in summer heat and autumn chill. Now each stone seemed precious. Each reed brushed against him with a soft, whispering sound. He reached the stream bank. Before him, the water moved between its banks, clear and quiet. A little farther away, the mountain path rose toward high, dry ground beneath the pines. The frog knew that this was where he should carry her, if he wished to do the opposite of what she had asked. He stood for a long while between the two paths. His mother had trusted the old pattern of his life. She had believed that even at the end, when she needed him most, he would reverse her wishes. Perhaps she had been certain of it. Perhaps she had wished in her heart for the safe, dry ground of the mountain, and had asked for the stream so that his stubbornness would carry her there. The frog looked at the stream. He thought of her voice beneath the willow. He thought of warm leaves, rain-washed stones, and the patient way she had waited for him to return. He thought of all the times she had spoken kindly while he did the opposite. Well, with great care, he laid her beside the water, doing, for the last time, exactly as she had asked. The stream touched the earth near her resting place. Grasses leaned over her. The willow cast a soft shade. The frog arranged the leaves around her as gently as he could, and then he sat beside her, watching the current pass. For a while, everything was quiet. Then the clouds gathered over the mountains. They came slowly, grey upon grey, folding across the sky. The air changed. The valley darkened. Leaves turned their pale undersides to the wind. Far away, thunder moved like a deep murmur behind the hills. The first drops fell into the stream. The water rose around the stones. It touched the grasses beside his mother's resting place. The frog watched, trembling. He had followed her words exactly, but now he feared that the stream might swell and carry her away. He called out. His voice was small at first, then urgent. He called toward the clouds, toward the hills, toward the running water. He called because he was sorry. He called because he loved her. He called because there was nothing more he could do. The rain continued through the evening. It silvered the willow leaves and filled the hollows in the earth. The stream moved faster, but the bank held. His mother's resting place remained beneath the willow, sheltered by roots and grass. Still, the frog did not leave. Whenever the sky grows dark and rain approaches, the old people say, the green frog remembers that evening. He remembers his mother's gentle voice, and the one time he obeyed her exactly. He remembers the stream rising, and his own worried calls beside the water. That is why frogs cry out before the rain. They are not calling to make the storm louder. They are keeping watch. They are remembering. They are asking the water to pass gently over the earth, where someone beloved is resting. And when the rain has finished, when the clouds loosen and the hills shine darkly beneath the clear night, the frog grows quiet again. He listens to the stream settling into its banks. He listens to drops falling from willow leaves. He listens until the valley is peaceful. The rice fields breathe under the moon. The village lanterns grow dim. Mist gathers once more among the hills, and the stream carries its calm, silver sound through the sleeping valley. There, beside the water, the green frog keeps his faithful watch. And at last, beneath the soft rhythm of rain fading into distance, he rests, and gently, like turning the page of a well-loved book, our next story begins. There was once, in a quiet Korean valley, a woodcutter who lived alone at the edge of a forest. His little house stood beneath a slope of pine and oak, where the morning light came slowly through the branches, and the evening smoke from his hearth drifted among the trees before thinning into the dark. He was not rich, and he owned no broad fields or fine oxen. Each day he carried his axe beneath his arm, climbed the familiar paths, and gathered only the wood he needed to sell in the village and warm his small home. He was gentle by nature. When rain loosened a nest from a branch, he set it safely beneath the eaves. When winter tightened around the streams, he scattered a little grain for the sparrows. He spoke softly to old people, waited patiently for slow feet on the road, and never took more from the forest than his shoulders could carry. One morning, while he was cutting fallen branches in a sunlit clearing, a deer came running between the trees. Its breath made small clouds in the cool air, and behind it, far off, the woodcutter heard the faint sounds of hunters and hounds. The deer stumbled near his feet and looked up at him with wide, shining eyes. "Good woodcutter," it seemed to say, for in folktales the hearts of animals may sometimes open like windows. "Hide me, and I will remember your kindness." The woodcutter led the deer behind a screen of thick ferns and fallen cedar limbs. He covered the tracks with leaves and stood quietly until the hunters passed along the ridge. Their voices faded. The forest settled again, leaving only the ticking of water from a mossy stone. When the deer came out of hiding, it bowed its slender head. "For saving my life," it told him. "I will tell you of a place that may change your own. On certain mornings, heavenly maidens descend from the sky to bathe in a forest pool. They leave their feathered robes upon the bank, for without those robes they cannot fly back to the heavens. If you hide one robe, its owner must remain below. She may become your wife, and your house will no longer be empty." The deer paused, and its dark eyes grew serious. "But heed one thing, and do not forget it. However gently she asks, however sorrowfully she pleads, do not give the robe back to her until she has borne you 3 children. A mother of 3 cannot gather them all into her arms to carry them skyward. And so, for their sake, she will choose to stay. Return the robe before that day, and you may wake to find her gone." The woodcutter listened with wonder. He had never thought of keeping anyone below against her will, and the deer's advice troubled him a little. Yet the forest was lonely, and the thought of a warm voice in his house, of another bowl beside his own, stayed with him as he returned to his work. The deer told him where the pool lay, beyond a ridge of dark pines and a long meadow where the reeds whispered whenever the wind crossed them. It was a place the woodcutter had never visited. From that day onward, he kept the directions quietly in his mind, and the deer's warning quietly beside them. One morning, before dawn had fully opened, he followed the deer's path. Mist rested among the trees. The earth smelled of wet leaves and cool stone, and small beads of water shone along the spider webs stretched between the grasses. At last, he reached the pool. It was round and clear, fed by a spring beneath the roots of an ancient tree. Ferns leaned over its edges. White flowers floated on the surface, and the first pale sunlight gathered there, as if the sky itself had come down to look at its reflection. The woodcutter hid behind a broad-trunked tree. For a while, nothing moved except the leaves. Then a soft radiance appeared above the clearing, not bright enough to hurt the eyes, but gentle as moonlight resting on snow. From it descended several heavenly maidens, light-footed and laughing under their breath. They came down as though walking upon an invisible stair, their long sleeves brushing the morning air. Each maiden wore a feathered robe, delicate and gleaming, with colours like pearl, cloud, and the inside of a seashell. They laid the robes upon the bank and slipped into the pool. Their voices mingled with the water, and the clearing seemed to become a place outside ordinary time. The woodcutter watched with lowered eyes, for he did not wish to frighten them. Yet he remembered the deer's words. When the maidens turned toward the deeper water, he reached carefully from behind the tree and lifted one feathered robe. He folded it beneath his rough cloak and stepped back into the forest, where the shadows were cool and thick. After a while, the maidens climbed from the pool and gathered their robes one by one. Then one of them looked around in confusion. She searched beneath the ferns, among the roots, and beside the white flowers. Her sisters called to her from the shining air, but she could not leave without the robe. The others rose toward the heavens, their voices fading gently above the branches. The one who remained sat beside the pool, wrapped in her long wet hair, and looked across the water with quiet sorrow. The woodcutter came from the trees. He told her, not quite untruthfully, that he had found her alone and that she was welcome to shelter in his little house until her robe was found again. He did not tell her where it was hidden. At first, she was afraid, but his voice was kind, and the forest around them was already filling with birdsong and the warm breath of day. So she followed him. Their path led through pine needles and soft moss, past a stream where minnows flickered beneath the surface, and down toward the valley. The Heavenly Maiden had never walked upon the earth before. She paused to touch the rough bark of the trees, to watch butterflies settle on purple flowers, and to listen to the wooden clatter of a water wheel turning in the village. At the woodcutter's house, he gave her his cleanest garments, a simple skirt and jacket kept for festival days. They were humble, but she wore them gracefully. He brought water for her to wash, gathered fresh greens, and made a warm meal of rice, mushrooms, and mountain herbs. The maiden learned the ways of the earth slowly. She learned how smoke curled when the firewood was damp, how to draw water without spilling it, how to mend a torn sleeve, and how to read the coming rain in the deepening color of distant hills. The woodcutter, in turn, learned from her the names of stars he had looked at all his life and never understood. She could weave beautiful cloth. With a simple loom and steady hands, she made fabric that seemed to hold morning mist within its threads. She sang while she worked, and sometimes the birds fell silent to listen. The woodcutter would return from the forest, set down his bundle of branches, and stand at the doorway until the song was finished. The seasons moved gently around them. Spring brought rain that tapped upon the roof and woke green shoots beside the path. Summer filled the valley with cicadas and the scent of pine resin. In autumn, leaves gathered in red and gold along the doorstep. Winter laid snow upon the roof, and the two of them sat near the brazier while the wind moved through the bare branches. In time, they became husband and wife. Their home stayed small, but it grew warm with shared work. The woodcutter mended the roof and carried wood. The maiden spun thread, cooked rice, and set flowers in a clay jar. Their happiness was quiet, like lamplight seen through paper windows. They had 2 children, bright and lively, who followed their father along the forest paths and listened to their mother's songs. The children knew the names of birds and the changing shapes of clouds. At night, they slept beneath thick quilts while their parents watched the fire settle into a bed of red coals. The woodcutter loved them all deeply. Yet in his heart, he kept one small secret: the feathered robe. He had hidden it high in the rafters, wrapped in old cloth, where no one would think to look. He never spoke of it, and though the deer's warning sometimes stirred in his memory, wait until 3 children bind her to the earth. The years were so gentle, and his wife seemed so contented that he let the caution drift to the back of his mind. Surely, he thought, so happy a home could never come undone. Years passed. The children grew tall enough to reach the low branches of the persimmon tree. The Heavenly Maiden grew used to the rhythm of earthly life, and for a long while she did not speak of the sky. Still, on clear evenings she would stand outside and gaze upward. The stars seemed to know her. Their pale light rested on her face, and the woodcutter sometimes wondered whether she remembered the road home. One autumn afternoon, while the woodcutter was away gathering kindling, the children were playing inside. They wanted to see the old things stored in the rafters, and in their play they found a bundle tucked beneath the roof beams. The cloth loosened. Something soft and shimmering unfolded across the floor. Their mother entered and saw it. At once, memory returned to her, not as a sharp pain, but as a distant song heard through many years. She remembered the forest pool, her sisters waiting in the light, and the open road of the heavens. She took the robe into her hands, and its feathers trembled as though they had been sleeping and were only now waking. The 2 children gathered close. The maiden looked at them, then toward the doorway where the afternoon sky shone blue beyond the garden. She loved her family, and her heart was divided between the house that had sheltered her and the wide home from which she had come. When the woodcutter returned, he found the yard hushed. His wife stood there, wearing the feathered robe, the children holding her hands, and he understood at once. Too late. The deer's old caution came back to him whole, that he ought to have waited for a third child, whose small arms she could not have left behind. He did not shout or blame her. He only asked her to stay a little longer, to let him look upon her once more. But the robe had already returned her heavenly lightness. A soft glow gathered around her feet, and the air lifted the edges of her sleeves. She kissed the children and embraced the woodcutter. She told him that she would not forget the years they had shared, the warm meals, the winter fires, the songs beside the loom. Then she rose softly into the sky. The children watched until she became a small figure among the clouds, and then only a glimmer remained. The woodcutter stood in the yard long after the evening shadows had crossed the garden. The house seemed larger without her, and the sounds within it seemed to have travelled far away. He went on caring for the children. He chopped wood, cooked rice, patched their clothes, and sat beside them beneath the winter moon. Yet longing followed him like a quiet companion. At night he looked toward the heavens, wondering whether his wife could see the same stars. One evening, after the children had fallen asleep, he stood outside and saw a silver bucket descending from the sky. It came down slowly, lowered by an unseen rope, catching the moonlight above the roof. For in the heavens, it is said, the maidens draw their water from the world below. The woodcutter remembered his wife's home beyond the clouds. Without hesitation, he stepped into the bucket. Upward he went. The village roofs grew small. The forest became a dark green pattern beneath him. Rivers shone like threads of glass, and the clouds opened into wide, still fields. The bucket rose through cool mist and silver light until the earth lay far below, and the heavens seemed near enough to touch. At last he reached the sky. His wife found him there, and their reunion was gentle and full of tears. She led him through a heavenly garden, where flowers opened without any wind, and streams ran clear as crystal. Above them, the stars moved slowly along their deep blue paths. The woodcutter could not remain there forever, for the earth still held his children. But now the distance between earth and heaven was no longer endless. Love had made a way through it. When he looked downward, he could see the valley, the forest, and the small roof of his home. When he looked upward, he saw his wife waiting among the clouds, and so, they say, the woodcutter came and went between the two worlds. Sometimes the sky sent down a shining bucket for him. Sometimes the Heavenly Maiden looked toward the earth and remembered the warm rooms, the children's laughter, and the sound of an ant resting against a tree. At night, when clouds drift over the Korean hills and the moon shines upon the roofs, some people say the bucket may still be moving quietly between the stars and the valley. Perhaps the woodcutter is rising through the silver air, carrying the gentle longing of earth. Perhaps his wife is waiting above, her feathered robe glowing softly beside the cloud garden. Below, the forest keeps breathing. Pine branches brush one another in the dark. Water slips over stones. In a small house, a lamp burns low, and the children sleep peacefully beneath their quilts. The sky keeps its quiet watch. The earth rests beneath it, and between them, joined by memory, tenderness, and love, two worlds remain close enough for a heart to travel from one to the other. Thank you for sitting with me tonight. I hope these stories helped you drift somewhere soft and quiet. Good night.